So today we pick back up in our sermon series, New Year, Same Promises, as we continue to walk through this Epiphany season with eyes wide open for the ways that Jesus continues to appear in our lives and in the world. 2 weeks ago, Shane guided us up the hill where Jesus spoke to the crowds that had followed him from Galilee, from the 10 cities, the Decapolis, from Jerusalem, from Judea, and beyond the Jordan. In other words, they had come from everywhere around. They'd come to listen and to learn, to be healed, and to have their lives pieced back together. They'd come in search of meaning, of direction, and purpose. And in return, they, each of them, were blessed. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Blessed are you who are poor in spirit, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you peacemakers, for you will be called children of God. Statements that help Jesus to articulate his understanding of the broadness and the richness of God's mercy and of God's grace. Jesus made clear that those who mourn, those who are dispirited, and those who are low in society's social order will be seen and will be tended to by God. More than that, they will be part of Jesus' mission and ministry in the world. Jesus also affirmed that aligning oneself with God's purposes by being merciful, by being earnest, and by building peace is more important than participating in the manipulative, power-hungry, and violent structures of the empire. And Jesus warned that persecution and conflict would likely come. He said that when you hold yourself up to God's high calling instead of Rome's low calling, that you are bound to attract some unpleasant attention. When you show your neighbors that a different kind of life is possible, you're bound to threaten those who hold and uphold the status quo. Knowing that persecution will come, today's reading from Matthew is a section where Jesus tells his followers to stay on God's course, even when it becomes a struggle. But it's a road that they and that we never walk alone. The grace of God and the example of Jesus goes before us. Because these disciples, these followers who have come from far and they have come from wide, have a role to play in Jesus' mission and ministry in the coming of God's kingdom. They are the salt and they are the light, as we will hear. There can't be new life without them. And the same is true for you. Right here, right now, right where you sit. You and I this morning are among that crowd. We are one of them today. We've come today to see this one that we have heard about. We've come to listen and we've come to learn, to be healed and to have our lives pieced back together. So hear now God's continuing word from Matthew 5. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people so that they can see good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven. Don't even think that I have come to do away with the law and the prophets. I haven't come to do away with them, but to fulfill them. I say to you very seriously that as long as heaven and earth exist, neither the smallest letter nor even the smallest stroke of a pen will be erased from the law until everything there becomes a reality. Therefore, whoever ignores one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called lowest in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps these commands and teaches people to keep them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. I say to you that unless your righteousness is greater than the righteousness of the legal experts and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. From the Gospel of Matthew, this is the word of the Lord. So let's begin with an unexpected question. So how many of you have some sort of smart device in your home, whether that is one of Amazon's Echo devices, whether that is Google Home, just by like raising your hands? Who has a smart? Okay, so it's a smattering of people, right? Do you enjoy it? Yes. So for me, for my family, I honestly don't know what we would do without it. So we have one of the Alexa, and I know if you're watching online and I keep saying Alexa that everything's going to light up and you're going to be annoyed with me, but I just really love our Alexa. We have them in just about every room in our house. In the morning, we catch up on the news together. We listen to audiobooks and podcasts, and she sets our lives to music. Everything from Disney favorites, which is a playlist. So Alexa, play Disney favorites. And she would be like, here we go, this is wonderful. To Taylor Swift, my daughter Addie's favorite, and to my husband Chance's favorite, music from the 1940s that he listens to while he is working. At Christmas, I can turn on all of my Christmas lights with just my voice. There's no walking from room to room. What would I do that for? I can just say, Alexa, turn on Christmas, and it all turns on. It is amazing. She is my alarm clock, and she is the rain sounds that I listen to when I sleep at night. It is truly life-changing. So this week, I was passing through my kitchen. And in the kitchen, we have one that actually has a screen. So, you can play videos and some announcements will come up on the screen. So I was passing by and I noticed a message from Alexa. And I feel like it was straight for all of us, actually. And she said on the screen, remember what's important. Remember what's important. And I have to tell you, it stopped me right in my tracks. Like, no joke. I was walking by and I saw that and I stopped. Remember what's important. Now, of course, I know that this actually was an advertisement for me to add things to my calendar. But as I passed it this week in the kitchen and she said, remember what's important, I thought to myself, oh, now that will preach, actually. Because the important thing that our scripture today calls us to remember is who we are. Who we are. Who you are. Jesus says to those gathered, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Not you will become, not you might be, or you could be, or you hope to be, or even you were. It doesn't say any of those things. No, Jesus says, you are, you are, you are. You are salt and light for the earth and for the world. It is a descriptive statement, a rich statement of our identity, and it is an affirmation of who we are and how God sees us as salt and as light. And these two metaphors that Jesus uses, salt and light, were common Jewish understandings of the relationship between God and humanity. This would not have felt foreign to those listeners that day. In the book of Leviticus, salt, used both to add flavor and to preserve food, was required to be part of the grain offering that people brought to the temple. In the book of Numbers, the promises and sacrifices that people make to God are called a covenant of salt. And the importance of salt, of course, reached far beyond Judaism, just this one section of the world. So what we might miss in our hearing today, because salt is so plentiful, is how precious salt actually was at the time that Jesus spoke these words. The book, Salt, A World History, I know that you will go and buy that today. Salt, A World History reminds us that from the beginning of civilization, until just about 100 years ago, salt was one of the most sought after commodities in all of human history. And it just sits right there on our table. We just don't appreciate it. The ancients believed that salt would ward off evil spirits. Salt was used for medicinal purposes, to disinfect wounds, of course, check for bleeding, to stimulate thirst, and to treat skin diseases. Roman soldiers were actually sometimes paid with salt, which is where we get our word salary. The Romans also salted their vegetables, and that's where we get salads. Around 10,000 years ago, and all of you dog lovers, you're going to find this interesting, because about 10,000 years ago, salt actually was used to domesticate those first dogs, because they would put little bowls of salt outside the houses, and the dogs would be enticed in, and over time, they kind of started to like those houses and to like those people who gave them salt. So there's an interesting fact for you. And in all the centuries before refrigeration, salt was essential for food preservation. For us still today, a rationed balance of salt in our bodies plays a crucial role for us maintaining kind of that perfect level of health. Salt has always been critical for the life of the world. So you are the salt of the earth. And remember those hearers gathered around Jesus. Remember who they were: the poor, the mournful, the meek, the persecuted, the hungry, the sick, the crippled, and the frightened, the outcast, the misfits, the disreputable, the demon-possessed. You, he told them all, you are all the salt of the earth. You who are not cleaned up, you who are not shiny and well-fed and fashionable, you who've been rejected, wounded, unloved, and forgotten, you are essential. You are worthwhile, and you are treasured. You are as precious as salt. And I am commissioning you. I am commissioning you. And there's some very traditional interpretations of what that means, what this proclamation called them to, and what it continues to call us to as well. So let's talk about some of those. Oftentimes, interpretations focus on flavoring. It's said that it means that we are to flavor the world. We are to season human activity in such a way that it reveals God in the world. You are to give things flair within an otherwise flavorless course of life. And this is an easy one, actually, for me to envision, because when I hear this, I think of the big pots of water on the stove on Sunday evenings for Sunday pasta. And as any good Italian American will tell you, that water better be as salty as the sea, or don't even try to make it. Or the interpretation might focus on salt's ability to melt ice. And there's certainly lots of beautiful things that can be done with that. But the salt within us melts the frozen hearts of God's people, to melt away cynicism, to melt away frustration and anger, to melt away hopelessness and indifference. All the things that stand in the way of looking in the mirror and seeing yourself as God sees you, as the beloved. Or perhaps this one: In Jesus' estimation, the potential for discipleship was as deeply embedded inside even the most common human as salt was in the sea that surrounded them. What that meant for their discipleship should be so ingrained in their being and their actions that were they to deny it, they would become as unrecognizable as salt that doesn't taste salty anymore. So those are all good options. Certainly you could make a sermon out of any one of those. But I have today for you a slightly more, let's say, indelicate interpretation. But it's also one that is rooted in history and it's rooted in culture. But again, it's a little bit indelicate. So let's start off just with one question, see if you can get the answer right, and it'll kind of start to paint the picture of where we're going to go with this interpretation. So and this is really answer, so I'm going to make it multiple choice though for you, so it'll be easy. What was the most common cooking fuel for Palestinians in Jesus' day? Okay, I'll read it again. I'm getting answers already. What was the most common cooking fuel for Palestinians in Jesus' day? So here are the options. A, wood. B, charcoal. C, animal dung. D, propane. Or E, electricity. See, there's always one throwaway just to make it a little easier. So what are we thinking? C, animal dung. Oh boy. The correct answer is C. Not perhaps the topic that you thought that we would talk about this morning, but here we are. So in ancient Israel and even around the world in modern times, clay or earthen ovens were used to cook meals. In biblical times, a small collection of homes were often built together, and they shared a common oven in the courtyard of the surrounding homes. And since villagers were often members of a very large extended family, these ovens were a lot of times thought of as family ovens. And so, as you all guessed so brilliantly, the common fuel for this oven was animal dung, something more plentiful and a lot more renewable than wood. So if you had a few oxen or camels or donkeys at your fingertips, you were all set. So one of the duties of each young girl was to learn how to collect the dung, to mix it with salt and mold it into patties that were left out in the sun to dry. Which I must pause here for a second and tell you that this all made my daughter Addie feel a lot better about her household chores. So somehow, like getting clean dishes out of the dishwasher seemed like a day at the park compared to this task. So because I read too this week that a family probably would have needed like 2,000 of these for the year. That's a lot. So in many developing countries, like I said, these dung patties are still used for fuel today. So for the earthen oven, central to the life of the family and the community, the place where bread was baked and life was nourished, into that place, a slab of salt. And here we go. Because it's a slab of salt that's placed at the bottom of the oven. Then the salted patty, we'll just say, was placed on top of the salt slab, and they would light it on fire. So as it turns out, and here's where we're going. I'm not taking you on this trip for nothing. As it turns out, salt has catalytic properties which cause those dung patties to burn better and to burn hotter. Okay? Burn better and burn hotter. Everyone sitting at the feet of Jesus on that hillside would have known this because it would have been part of their daily routine. They did not have to imagine this. They only had to remember, oh yeah, I did that yesterday. So something interesting happens to the salt slab over time, though. After a year or more of cooking, the salt slab loses its ability to help stoke the fire, and it became useless. Instead of helping create a better fire, they would do the opposite and actually stifle the fire. Then, as Jesus said, it is good for nothing, but is thrown outside where it can still provide a sure footing on a muddy path. So while using salts for culinary seasoning purposes might sound more appetizing and something we'd like to talk about a little bit more, talking about this story could be closer to what Jesus had in mind when he says, "You, my disciples, you are the salt." That is the catalyst for the earth oven. To be salt for the earth oven is to start fires, to make things burn, and to keep the flame going. If Jesus' disciples do this, if they embrace their identity as salt, as those sent as catalysts, then they will become the light of the world, burning bright for all to see. So you can start to see how Jesus ties together this image of salt and of light. Because in this passage, God's light is not external to humanity, but a gift of grace and a gift of guidance that is embedded in our very being. In accepting our part in Jesus' mission, we become the catalyst too, and the flame too. The disciples can light up the very world. And even at the outset of his ministry in the book of Matthew, Jesus seems aware that due to persecution and oppression from outside powers, his disciples will be tempted to hide their discipleship away, as though they are holding a lamp under a heavy basket. He tells them that they can't succumb to fearful temptation because light is utterly necessary for new growth and for change in the world, for the coming of the kingdom of God. So we too, I think, face that fearful temptation from time to time to demur from louder voices, to section off our faith, our discipleship limited to what we do here within these four walls, or simply it's something that we just do in private, believing or at least acting like faith and discipleship are solely personal matters. But salt and light, the holy passions that burn within us, the salt and light that God places within us, those things are needed for new growth in our world each and every day. Each and every day, not just on Sunday mornings. So poet Mary Oliver, I know I've used this before, has a poem that says, "I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" So will you use this one wild and precious life, being a catalyst for change in the earth oven that is actually all of creation? Because I'm going to tell you right now, and really pretty directly, that is what is needed. That is what is needed to be catalysts for change in our world. Be the salt. Let that salt kindle into a flame in your life so that it can't be hidden. Be a catalyst for the inbreaking of the kingdom. So I can tell you that I know that's what we need to be. But what I can't tell you is what that looks like specifically for you. So I'll ask you these things instead of being prescriptive for you. What holy passion burns within your heart? What holy imagination has God placed within your mind? And when you look at the world, and when you look at your neighbor, where does hope kindle for you? When you look at the world, What injustices and systems of oppression break your heart and urge you to action? Where can you go out into the world and put your hands to work? Where can you do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with your God, like we sang earlier and like Micah calls us to live? Because Jesus goes on in our scripture today to say that he did not come to do away with these things. He did not come to do away with the Torah, to do away with the law, to do away with beautiful words like the ones we hear from Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love your Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. They're to be on your hearts. Jesus came to fulfill all these things through his life, through his death, and through his resurrection, to point us to the radical love of God that has always been there, and it continues today, and it will be here long after you and I no longer walk this earth. The law in psalmic language is the lamp for the feet and the light for the path, is incarnate in the lives of justice, mercy, faith, and the light for the world, the kind of life that we are called to as catalysts, as salt, as light, because these things, all of them, live inside us the same way they lived inside Jesus. The same life-changing, world-changing spirit that was in Jesus is within us as well, and it calls us to action this very day, even as we sit here. So I'll ask you again, because I can't tell you what this looks like for you, but I'll leave you with this question just one more time. What is it that you are going to do with this one wild and precious life that God has given you?